All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I'm Joe. He's Nick. You're listening to the Nick and Joe Show on the Think Radio Broadcast Network. If you listen to the Nick and Joe Show regularly, you know every week it seems, or every couple of weeks, we have some kind of a technical issue that crops up, and it's like the liberals out there, the lefties, are trying to sabotage our show. And I don't know why, because even though we're, right of center, and even though we're proud conservatives, we're pretty decent and reasonable people. And we like to, approach things with a certain element of common sense. Yes, sometimes some passion, but common sense. And that's just the way we are. And speaking about passion and having some common sense, we wanted to talk a little bit in this segment. We did last week, but I think we want to go over some of this stuff again, especially in view of what we are now understanding better about the whole residential school business that has once again erupted. And so what we want to talk about is Canada Day. And in particular, what we want to talk about is the movement, and I would say the mindless movement, in this country to quote-unquote cancel Canada Day. And the justification for that is we're a bad country. We've done bad things. Look at what has again been discovered outside these residential schools. I mean, that was the precipitating event, was the discovery outside of Kamloops, this school in Kamloops, and then this another discovery of unmarked graves outside of a school in rural Saskatchewan. And so this is being used as a justification for people to say, and not just the average people, politicians, municipalities that have canceled Canada Day celebrations because of this. And the only way that you could turn this, the only way you could cut it, the only way you could slice it is that they're doing it because they are ashamed or they want to make a point about how bad Canada has been in the past. And that is such a mindless and puerile approach to take. Nick, you touched on it in the last segment, and we touched on this a little bit last week as well. And that is that who we are as Canadians allows us to face squarely the mistakes that we have made as a country in the past. To be able to say, yes, mea culpa, we did things that were wrong, we made mistakes along the way, but guess what? We've taken ownership of those mistakes. We've never tried to hide from them. We've made restitution when it's been appropriate, and we take corrective action when the time comes to take corrective action. And that's the mark of a healthy society, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is really what Canada is about. That's the heart and the soul of this country. Yes, we're guilty of doing things that we ought not to have done. Guess what? Newsflash to our friends on the left and our friends on the wherever you may be, who perhaps aren't thinking very deeply about any of these issues. Newsflash. We're all human beings. We're all fallible. To put it in theological terms, we are all sinners. And as a consequence of all of this, it's natural, it stands to reason that our governments or our institutions, whether they're government or private sector or whatever, that they're going to be fallible as well, and that collectively will make mistakes as well. This is not a surprise, and the mark of a healthy, vibrant, responsible, virtuous society is that society is made up of people who are mature enough and self-confident enough that they can look at themselves in the mirror and they can face their demons. Not pretend that they don't exist, but say, yeah, that happened, that was bad, we shouldn't have done it. And as I said, where there's appropriate to do restitution, you do restitution. Where it's appropriate simply to say, I'm sorry, you do that. Whatever, okay, is appropriate. One last thought, Nick, and then I turn it over to you. Having said all of these things, I also think it's really important to bear in mind, while we're talking about perspective, it's really important to keep in mind that whatever happened in these residential schools was bad. I'm sorry it happened, but it wasn't me. I wasn't there. I wasn't born. Same thing with you, Nick. And the same thing with the overwhelming majority of people, if not all people who are alive today in this country.
Well, you make a great point where self-flagellating, because, it's, first of all, it's the ultimate in virtue signaling. And the other thing is that we're trying to hold the son accountable for the sins of the father. And that has always bothered me. There's something else that bothers me about this, and it really needs to be mentioned, is the fact that there's people on Facebook are posting that this is a genocide. I don't agree that it is. I think it falls well short of the mark of that.
I think the whole argument about it being a genocide is absurd. This is not a genocide. It's not even close to a genocide. And I deeply resent the use of that term in connection with the events that we're describing here. Bad events, yes, but this is not a genocide.
Okay.
So please stop, not you, Nick, but I'm saying to people, please stop using that terminology. It's just grossly inaccurate.
But let's say, for the sake of the discussion, that they're right. What about the Iroquois genocide towards the Huron? It's funny that even when they do, they never say, well, the Iroquois completely wiped out the Huron. And, there's just a culture out there of the noble savage. And look, it's easy to gloss things over, and use the victim card. And I'm not knocking the natives or aboriginals or anything like that. I think their cultures do offer us a lot to learn from. However, the people who are native to North America, because they were here first, no one is native to North America. The original founding nations, if you want to use that term, they're made up of human beings. And there are some good ones, and there are some bad ones, and there are some awful ones. And it's true for every group on the planet. We have them in Canada. We have them in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, China, you name it. I don't care what corner of the world you go to. You are going to find people who fall into every kind of person, no matter what the culture is. So why would the natives be any different? This is something that I think needs to be recognized. I would be a lot more comfortable with it if they would say, okay, look, whatever happened, it was a terrible thing. Let's try and learn from it and move on. But that never happens. It's always, Western European bad, everybody else good, and it's absolute nonsense. So getting back to celebrating Canada as a nation, let's not forget, as I mentioned before, all the good things that we have done, and they far outweigh. There is no order of magnitude that you can compare the good versus the bad and come out with the bad winning when it comes to Canada. You just can't do it. The scales will never tip that way, or just can't tip that way. We have been all kinds of different technological advances. We were the end of the what am I thinking of? Where the slaves would come up from the States. Underground Railroad. I mean, we have all kinds of things to be very, very proud of. For crying out loud, we invented the world's greatest game. Okay, hockey was the most brilliant game on the planet. It's ours. There's all kinds of things to be proud of about being Canadian, and all that's being pushed aside and ignored. And I'm sorry, I think that is a huge injustice and is a problem when it comes to the kind of slap in the face that is to our ancestors who came here before from places like Ireland, places like the Ukraine, places like Poland, places like any other nation on earth. You run down the list, and they're still coming here. Why do people come here? Why do they come here even more so than the United States? It's because Canada is one of the few beacons of hope in the world. Now, our job as a nation is to make sure it stays that way. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about politics, because when I look at present leadership, I see nothing but darkness and destruction. And they're trying their very best to undermine everything this country stands for. And they're going to make it difficult, if not impossible, for as many people as possible to live unmolested, freely, so they can succeed or fail based on their character and on their strengths and weaknesses, not based on what they look like, who they sleep with, or where they come from.
Okay. I don't know that I could add much to that, Nick. I think that you've stated your case quite eloquently. And, I think that we could just keep on going on and on like a broken record. Canada's a decent place to live. It's not perfect. Canadians are not perfect. There is no culture. There is no country. There's no people or population. There are no perfect people. It's just that's human nature. And, at some point in time, you have to be able to accept the fact that people make mistakes. I would even go so far as to say that people have the right to be wrong. They have the right to make mistakes. And the mark of a healthy and vibrant and good society is not that they don't make mistakes. It's that when they do make mistakes, they're able to acknowledge those mistakes and correct them, and then turn the page and move on. And again, newsflash, we're going to make mistakes again. We're going to make more mistakes. And hopefully we're not going to find ourselves in such an arrogant position as I detect we're moving towards now as a society. There's this false sort of humility, but I don't really think it's real. I think that to a degree, there's an enforced conformity of thinking. And if you're not part of the groupthink, then you're ostracized, you're quote unquote canceled. And all right, nobody wants to hear you if you're wrong and if you're a bad person and if you're espousing bad ideas. But what happens when you're the lonely voice out there who actually is right? Someone like Galileo, someone like Copernicus, two names that come to mind immediately. Let's not forget that these are people who were persecuted, who actually were right. And so this would be a major concern of mine. And this whole residential school thing and this whole Cancel Canada Day thing is just a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Like, here we are. We want to talk about facts on our show. We want to talk common sense. We don't want to be excessively passionate, overboard, or anything like that. We just want to speak the truth or get at the truth. Which is what we're supposed to be doing. But even us on our show, we feel constrained before we speak what we are pretty certain is the truth, and in many cases we know is the truth, but we know we're going against the grain, Nick. Even us, we feel that we have to introduce the topic sensitively, maybe be gentle, maybe even a little apologetic. So we're talking about residential schools. I have a pretty good idea of what's going on, and I know some of the facts around it, and I'm looking at the evidence around this, but I'm afraid of offending people who don't want to get at the truth. They just feel bad, and they don't want their bad feelings to be challenged. They don't want their feelings to be challenged on any level. And so even we start to say, okay, well, look, I'm not saying this, I'm not saying that, so nobody should get excited, we ourselves, to a degree, fall into the trap. But it's just an indication of how bad things have gotten. It's shocking how bad things have gotten so quickly. That to me is a real shocking thing, because maybe in some level, foundationally, maybe it's been brewing for 15 or 20 or 25 or 30 years. But the eruption, if you will, okay, to use a volcano analogy, the eruption